white cliffs of Dover. Starting point for an epic journey round one of the most complex and fascinating coastlines in the world. Our own. The coast is where the story of an island nation, its history, its geography, and above all its people, is told most vividly. This is life on the edge, the coast as you've never seen it before. It's easy to think that the coast is merely where the country stops, where the land falls into the sea. In fact, our coastline is at the very heart of our shared history, the source of so much national wealth, and where empire was born. Many of us work here. Even more of us come here to play. But few of us have ever travelled its entire length. Until now. This is a once-in-a-lifetime journey. We'll be exploring the coast of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, uncovering the treasures that have made us the island nation we are today. But to fully appreciate the diversity of our coast, we'll take a diverse range of skills. So I'll be travelling with a small, dedicated team of experts. Writer and historian Neil Oliver will explore the human stories behind the history. Zoologist Miranda Krestovnikov is our guide beneath the waves. Anthropologist Alice Roberts will be grappling with the actual stuff that makes up our coastline. Archaeologist Mark Horton is going to dig up the hidden histories along our familiar shores. And me? Fantastic! Well, I just can't wait to get started. An 11,700-mile adventure. This is the story of coast. The first leg of our journey takes us the 330 miles from Dover to Exmouth. A coastline pockmarked by a legacy of invasion and war. This is Britain's front line. Many of our neighbours have had a crack at invading here. One or two even succeeded. Since Roman times, we've been fortifying this coast, building chains of linked defences. Grand castles, Saxon shore forts, evolving and reinventing them as the enemy got stronger, but always looking nervously out to sea. This is a Martello Tower. It's number 3 just outside Folkestone. Number 1 Martello Tower is over there, and nestling down in the hollow is number 2. And stretching away along the south coast in that direction are another 71. All 74 towers were built in the early 1800s at a time when Napoleon Bonaparte had overrun most of Europe and saw no reason why Britain should be left out of his grand design. Oh, it's rather beautiful. There's not a straight edge to be seen on the ceilings or the walls. It's a room entirely full of curves. And look how thick the walls are. Each of these towers was built from 500,000 bricks, and it might look round, but actually it's elliptical, built thicker on the seaward side to withstand the cannon fire of an attacking French navy. The building of 74 towers was a hugely ambitious engineering project, but ultimately they were never put to the test. In 1805, Napoleon's seemingly unstoppable march through Europe was halted when he was beaten by Admiral Lord Nelson at Trafalgar. The final nail in the coffin came 10 years later at Waterloo. Napoleon was a spent force. For the next 100 years, war, at least as far as the British were concerned, was something that happened a long way away, never on our own shores. That long spell of peace at home came to an abrupt end with the outbreak of the First World War. The German aircraft that bombed London in 1917 were primitive, but they proved that warfare had taken to the skies. When the war was over, military strategists had to face an alarming truth. The waters around our shores, dominated for over 500 years by the Navy, could now just be flown over. In future, wars would be won or lost from the air. The success of our defence would depend on early warning of attack. And before the advent of radar, the best chance we had of getting that early warning was one of these monolithic, upturned concrete soap dishes. Known as sound mirrors, these top-secret constructions built between the wars were designed as giant ears to listen out for approaching enemy aircraft. Most of them have been demolished, vandalised, or have simply rotted away, but remarkably this one just outside Folkestone is still standing. And just 18 miles further down the coast, at Denge near Dungeness, 3 more sound mirrors remain in a remarkable condition, considering they were abandoned more than 70 years ago. It's hard to believe that these long-forgotten relics of war played a vital role in the defence of the United Kingdom. Great to meet you. Richard Scarth has dedicated 20 years of his life to the study of the mirrors. Richard, they're incredible. The sound mirrors were the life's work of one man, Dr. William Tucker. Richard, by the time Tucker came here, he'd been working on sound detection equipment for 20 years.
He had, and the result of their work was this magnificent structure here, the biggest sound mirror of all.
This is a monument to his life work.
Yes, it is, yes.
It is absolutely fantastic. It's enormous. In their day, these mirrors were the cutting edge of military hardware. 70 years on, they lie abandoned, and the secrets of how they work forgotten. But with the help of the National Physical Laboratory and the Open University, we're going to unravel their mysteries and get them working again. Very little technical information has survived, so our scientists are going to have to work from scratch, and their first discovery is that the mirrors are much more complicated than they appear.
Okay, so it's ready to go.
Yeah, because that's as far as we're going up.
In the 1930s, as Tucker's team struggled to perfect the sound mirrors, tension was rising across Europe. And in Britain, the government began to assess the country's readiness for war. As part of those exercises, aircraft were flown towards the sound mirrors to assess their early warning capabilities. We've got a Tiger Moth standing by to do the same thing. But before it can take to the air, we've got to discover how the mirrors actually work.
A little bit more, try a little bit more.
By setting up 2 microphones, a red one listening to the mirror and a control microphone marked with blue, well away from the mirror, our scientists hope to reveal the sound mirror's secrets.
Well, what we're using is a single tone, and so what that shows up on this graph is a single peak, and you can see this single peak here.
Very dramatic spike.
On the top graph,
Which is the red microphone.
at the sound mirror focus, you can see that we've got a level which is up around 70, 80 decibels in fact. On the blue graph at the bottom,
That's the microphone standing in the open.
yeah, you can see the level's much lower, down at about 60 decibels.
So the sound mirror microphone is picking up much more sound.
So they're amplifying it by as much as 15 decibels.
So this is exactly what Tucker's engineers, his physicists, would have been doing all those years ago.
Exactly.
Our first eureka moment. The sound mirror makes the tone almost 4 times louder.
In the simplest case, an aeroplane could be coming in, sound waves coming from that aeroplane are going to hit the mirror at different points. And where those reflected rays meet is what we call the focal point, and you'll get an increase in the sound level at that point. But if, say, for example, the aeroplane was off axis, sound travelling from that is going to bounce off the mirror. But this time the angles would have changed. The focal point has now moved down to here. If you simply move your microphone, you can get not only an early warning that a plane's coming in, but also the direction.
Which is the essence of early warning.
Absolutely.
Right, well that's got enough water out. We can now see how the mechanism works, can't we?
Yes, you've got to imagine that underneath here was an operating room, and there's a man sitting in there who's got control of this apparatus, which is designed to move a trumpet which are on the end of that arm over the focal area of the mirror. The mirror is designed to focus sound just a few feet in front of it, and so the collector went round at that plane and picked up the sounds, hopefully, of a distant aero engine. And when he listened in his stethoscopes, and when he got to the place where it was the loudest sound, that was the direction which the aircraft was coming. And of course, the idea was that there'd be several of these mirrors up and down the coast, and they could work together to a control centre, and of course they'd get cross bearings, which would give them more accuracy.
At the heart of this larger network of mirrors was Dr. Tucker's 200-foot wall. Armed with the understanding we've gained from our experiments at the smaller mirror, our scientists are now ready to use Tucker's wall for our own early warning test. Our tiger moth will head out to sea, then turn back and approach the mirror along its axis, which we've marked with a white sheet.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Flying at 500 feet and 90 miles an hour, this mimics one of the government tests from the 1930s. I'm going to put these headphones on, and these are wired up to the red microphone in front of the sound mirror. So if Tucker's wall works, I'm going to hear the plane first.
Yes.
The piston engine tiger moth of the 1930s sounds exactly like the planes that Tucker's men would have been listening out for. Tension's really unbearable just waiting. Complete silence. Headphones are silent. Can't see anything yet. I'm getting something! I can hear it! And some spikes. I can't hear a thing without them on.
Nothing on the blue trace.
Blue trace. There's definitely the tiger moth. There's its fingerprint. Fantastic! Now I can hear it really clearly. Yeah, here he comes.
Coming through on the
Really loud now. There it is! Right above us at last. Tucker's machine beat the human ear by a long way. That was fantastic. 70 years on, still works. So we got nearly 40 seconds, or about a 1 mile advance warning. Not bad for a 70-year-old piece of concrete, but nowhere near Tucker's best ever results of over 20 miles. But in 1933, while Dr. Tucker and his team were toasting their success, other scientists were measuring a BBC radio signal as it bounced off a Hayford bomber. After only 5 months in development, this discovery, the earliest form of radar, was detecting planes over 40 miles away, twice the distance that the sound mirrors had ever achieved. It was all over for Dr. Tucker's acoustic detection system. By 1937, the sound mirrors had been abandoned. What became of Dr. Tucker, Richard?
For some reason that nobody seems to be able to explain, he was more or less forcibly made to retire. And one of the last things he was asked to do was to destroy the mirrors by blowing them up. But thank goodness he didn't obey his orders.
Dr. Tucker's retirement may have been the end for the sound mirrors, but nevertheless, they were to have a profound effect on the course of the Second World War. The reporting structure that Tucker developed for the mirrors was copied by the radar team and led directly to their success in the Battle of Britain. The 745 from Hastings to London. Not an obvious choice for a coastal journey, but something rather interesting's happened along this stretch of the coast. It's easy to think of our coast as unchanging. In fact, it's constantly in flux.
We are now approaching Pevensey Bay. Would customers please...
Erosion is eating away at much of our famous landscape. And yet here in Pevensey Bay, different forces have been at work. Ever since William the Conqueror landed here just under 1,000 years ago, this shoreline has changed beyond recognition. Rather than eroding, it's been growing. As much as 1.5 miles has been added, reclaimed from the sea. Land reclamation, or inning, has been going on here since the 13th century, when the local church authorities would pay to have the land drained and turned over to agriculture. But just beyond Eastbourne, where the Commuters and I Park Company, is Beachy Head, the flip side of coastal change. At 163 metres above sea level, the cliffs at Beachy Head are the highest chalk sea cliffs in the United Kingdom. The question is, as they say in the soap powder ads, how do they stay so white? The unhappy answer? Erosion. The cliffs barely have time to get dirty before the wind and waves strip them away. Up to 1 metre is lost every year. In 1999, the Beltoot Lighthouse made headline news when the owners paid nearly £200,000 to have it moved back from the cliff edge to prevent it falling into the sea. At the current rate of erosion, it's a procedure they'll have to repeat in 2016, and again in 2033, 2050, 2067, 2084... 20 miles further round the coast is Brighton, a resort with a long-established reputation for hedonism. For centuries, it's played host to an invasion of Londoners who want a bit of sin by the sea. Or in it, for that matter. The long beach that stretches from Brighton to Selsey Bill is a playground for holidaymakers. But beyond the candy floss and deck chairs, there's another world. A world beneath the waves that most of us never get to see. This journey is not just going to take us along the coast, but into the seas around our islands, to reveal the extraordinary diversity of our marine wildlife. A subject that zoologist Miranda Krestovnikov has been studying all her working life.
I've dived all over the world, but it's easy to forget that there are some stunning wildlife dives much closer to home. But when 2 local divers, Robert Walker and Paul Parsons, told me there was a good chance of photographing cuttlefish just offshore here, I was a bit sceptical. So are you expecting to see activity like this if we dive today, or is this quite unique?
Well, I think we'll find some cuttles. I don't know whether we'll quite get this activity because everything's got to be just right for it. But we should be able to find you some cuttlefish and hopefully mating. That's it.
All this equipment and all this effort, I really hope it's worth it and there are cuttlefish down there. The viz may not be that good, but you know, once you get your eye in, there's loads to see down here. And here's a tube worm, and this feeds by just picking up whatever's floating past in the current. And if I just reach out and touch it with my finger, there you go, it's retracted its tentacles. We're only a few metres out and a few metres deep. There is so much marine life here. This little dragon-looking creature is a pipefish. They look a bit like seahorses, they're related to seahorses. Oh look! There's a cuttlefish! That's exactly what we wanted to see. You know, there's such exotic-looking creatures, you'd never imagine to find something like this right here in the British waters.
It's very big, a couple of feet long.
looks sort of alien. A really, really unusual shape with those big eyes and this floating skirt. Really odd-looking creatures.
Cuttlefish are in the same family as squid and octopus. Sometimes known as the chameleon of the sea, they can change their body colour and patterning to mesmerise their prey.
Just realised there's a change. And up there, those two tentacles, and they go a darker colour. He's obviously feeling a little bit threatened. That's their sort of threat posture. And off he goes. Oh gosh, what's he got? Oh my goodness me, he's just grabbed a crab. That's amazing. Have you ever seen that before?
Cuttlefish have a sharp, parrot-like beak and a venomous bite, which will make short work of this crab. As the sea warms in spring, cuttlefish invade these shallow waters to mate and lay their eggs. And this part of the south coast is a real hotspot for them. Male cuttlefish dazzle the smaller females with their striped patterns and flowing tentacles. They mate head-to-head with tentacles entwined. After mating, the male cuttlefish guards his female as she deposits her eggs, dyed black with ink to deter predators. This cuttlefish invasion lasts all summer, but as the water cools and with their life cycle complete, both males and females die, leaving their bones to be washed up on the beach.
It's truly amazing diving this close to the shore and seeing these weird creatures. That's a pretty incredible dive.
We're almost halfway through the first leg of our journey to Exmouth. About 130 miles from Dover is the city of Portsmouth. A place with centuries of maritime history.
A fair proportion of which is connected directly or indirectly with the Royal Navy down there.
Her Majesty's Naval Base Portsmouth currently harbours 2/3 of the Navy's surface fleet. But the city's proud naval tradition goes back nearly 1,000 years, with many decisive military campaigns being launched from here. The fleet's biggest engagement of recent years was in 1982. On the 5th of April, the first ship set sail from Portsmouth on the 8,000-mile journey to the Falkland Islands. The question is, why here? Why was Portsmouth chosen above other ports on the south coast to be home of the Royal Navy? Archaeologist Mark Horton is in the historic dockyard to find the answer.
Morning.
Right, morning.
Morning.
We go for a trip?
Yes, climb aboard.
My guide, Roy Rolfe, started off by explaining how the geography here works to make this place an ideal port. Crucially, the huge expanse of water in Portsmouth Harbour is only accessible through a small entrance.
Right in the entrance now. You can see it's very narrow.
And presumably defensible because it's so narrow.
That's right, yes. We're now actually out into the entrance channel to Portsmouth Harbour, under the shore of the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight is one of the main reasons why this is such a good harbour.
So that's as a sort of protection against,
Yes,
despite the fact we can see the wind coming in, it's quite sheltered.
And it also means that the harbour is always usable. You don't get the sort of weather that you could get at Dover sometimes by the breakwater, where it's something of a lottery to get in and nail in really bad weather.
The harbour at Portsmouth has a lot to recommend it, but in many ways its trump card has nothing to do with its physical geography and everything to do with politics. For much of her history, England was at war with her continental neighbours. First the French, then the Spanish, and then the Dutch. In those battles, it was considered important to have a harbour as close as possible to the enemy. For the Spanish wars, that meant Plymouth. For fighting the Dutch, Chatham in Kent was best. But it was the French wars that were begun by Henry VIII that really made this place important. Henry created the Royal Navy in 1525 and decreed that Portsmouth should be its home. Through fighting the French 7 times in 290 years, Portsmouth grew from 1,000 people in 1545 to over 30,000 in 1800. Now the docks were home to 684 ships and were the largest industrial complex in the world. But things for Portsmouth were about to change again. Just listen to that wind to the rigging! The victory where Nelson defeated the French 200 years ago at the Battle of Trafalgar. But ironically, it was that victory against the French that changed the role of Portsmouth forever. From the base where we fought the French to the place where we patrolled the world and fulfilled our imperial ambitions. For the next 200 years, Portsmouth's growth was driven more by technological innovation than military need. The move from sail to steam in the 19th century saw the biggest expansion. It's the sea just the other side of those somewhat rusty gates. This is the number 6 dry dock, one of around 20 here. Portsmouth was not just the centre for naval operations, but also an important dockyard where ships could be built and come to be repaired. As the ships got larger and larger, so the dry docks themselves had to get bigger and bigger to keep pace with technological change. If the 19th century saw Portsmouth grow with every new technology of war, the 20th century saw the benefit during 2 world wars. In the 21st century, warfare continues to change. So what is the future for our oldest naval base?
For the surface navy, particularly the escorts and the aircraft carriers, this is where it's all at, yes.
And does it still work as a harbour? Is it suitable for a modern navy?
Oh, very suitable. There's a large investment programme going on to make sure it continues to be suitable, continues to evolve to meet modern requirements.
Portsmouth is here because of medieval monarchs and Henry VIII and the French.
I think the reason he chose it was because France was the enemy. Today that is not the case.
Do you think in 500 years' time there will be a base here at Portsmouth?
As long as we've got a navy, it'll still be here.
Leaving Portsmouth behind, we're continuing west. 18 miles further round is this coast's most important commercial port, Southampton. Massive liners like the Queen Mary II make regular trips to New York from here. But more infamously, in April 1912, the Titanic's maiden and only voyage began from this port. Southampton is also the starting point of historian Neil Oliver's flight to Alderney, the 3rd largest of the Channel Islands, and the place on our shores which bears the scars of invasion more vividly than anywhere else. The British Isles comprise over 6,000 islands, many of which we'll visit on this journey. But unlike the Scottish Islands, or say the Isle of Wight, the Channel Islands are technically not part of the United Kingdom. Even so, they come under the protection of the British Crown. 65 years ago, that protection was tested to breaking point. During the Second World War, the Channel Islands were occupied by German forces. Alderney became home to 4 forced labour camps and nearly 7,000 slave labourers.
Those are the bare facts. What they don't tell you, though, is what the slave labourers were really doing on Alderney and what their day-to-day existence was actually like. Well, that's it, I'm through. No passport control, no customs, because I'm still in Britain. By 1940, with the German forces in control of Western Europe, the first invasion of British soil in nearly 900 years looked inevitable. 7.5 miles from the French coast, the people of Alderney were going to be the first Britons to be overrun.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills.
Of course, there were a few beaches that Britain wasn't going to be fighting on. After the fall of France, the Channel Islands were in the front line, and the British Army took the decision that the best move was to evacuate the islands and leave their fate in the lap of the gods. So this is where it took place then, the evacuation?
Buster Hammond was among the first to be given the order to evacuate.
I mean, can you describe what that was like? I can't imagine the thought of, leaving everything I've known.
I know. I mean, when the door of the house that you're living in is opened, you never lock them anyway, and the man's voice shouts up the stairs, the boats are in, you've got 2 hours to leave, to board, 1 suitcase each. I mean, what do you go to get, actually, in cases like that? We were more concerned about the cat.
When you were all down here waiting to get on the boats, what was the atmosphere like?
No panic, no panic. We just waited our turn, got on board the boats, just as simple as that. I dare say there was a few tears here and there, but naturally, you left. I mean, some of the people had never been off the island.
The islanders were taken to England, uncertain when, or even if, they would ever see Alderney again.
Once that last ship had sailed, the island of Alderney was abandoned, and here, St Anne's was a deserted ghost town. Clothes left hanging in wardrobes, fires going cold in the hearths. The whole place was at the mercy of whoever was coming. Within days of the evacuation, Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes were circling the island like vultures. Then, on the 2nd of July, the Nazis landed on Alderney soil for the very first time.
The Germans had invaded an empty island, and it wasn't long before they began to implement their plans for Alderney.
It was one of the principal Channel Islands, and effectively they were providing offshore gun platforms for the defence of the mainland of France.
In 1941, Hitler ordered the construction of huge bunkers like this, as well as gun emplacements and fortifications all over the island.
Tiny little door's the only way in.
It is. Pretty impressive structure, isn't it?
God, look at the depth of the wall as well.
2 meters thick, concrete, reinforced. There we are. Turn through 90 degrees here.
Lead on.
On the right, we've got an entrance defence position. And this corridor then leans forward.
Ah, daylight.
Yeah, you get an idea of the panorama.
Oh, that's just brilliant, isn't it? What a view.
I'm beginning to realise what the concentration camps must have been for. The scale of construction here is awesome. They were labour camps for the building of these bunkers, and the masterminds behind this scheme were the infamous German construction force, Organisation Tod.
The organisation Tod cut their teeth on the building of the German Autobahn system and the fortifications of the West Wall in Germany, so that by the time they came to the occupied countries of Europe, they were experienced in building this type of fortification.
So is this literally the book that you could work from to build your defensive position?
Yes, absolutely. It's the pocketbook carried by the engineers when they came to the site.
I love these artist's impressions of what your finished bunker's going to look like once the grass is back.
It's chilling how clinical these plans are, because however sanitised they look, you can never forget they were built by slaves.
The forced labourers who worked here for organisation taught were accommodated in 4 camps, all of them named after German North Sea islands. There was Helgoland, Borkum, Sylt, and right down there, Norderney.
Camp Norderney held over 1,500 prisoners from all over occupied Europe. They were kept in filthy wooden shacks. Today, nothing remains, no clue to the story of what happened here. One of the last surviving prisoners is 82-year-old Monsieur David Tratt, a French Jew who was only brought here and spared the death camps of Auschwitz because his wife was a Christian.
Le réveil, c'était 5 heures. On travaillait 12 heures par jour. On crevait de faim. On avait faim, mais c'est très difficile à expliquer cette faim parce que ça n'a rien à voir avec... Dans la vie courante, on dit j'ai faim, mais là, on ne pense qu'à manger. On est obsédé par la nourriture.
How were you treated by the guards here?
On était frappés constamment ici, toujours, un peu tous les jours.
We were beaten with everything they could lay their hands on, with sticks, spades, and then we didn't get any food. There were many men among us over 70 years of age, but nobody was spared. Hard physical work for 12. Sometimes we were accused of laziness, but mostly we were beaten out of hatred.
How did you survive?
C'est la chance, le moral, parce qu'on espérait, c'était l'espérance de revenir de retrouver sa famille, de retrouver les siens.
Many would never see their families again. No one knows exactly how many died in the labour camps on Alderney. The official figure is 437, but many believe that the death toll was much, much higher. The surviving slave workers were finally moved from the island to camps on mainland Europe on the 7th of May 1944. 1 month later, the liberation of Europe began, but the Channel Islands remained under increasingly desperate German occupation for a further year. Finally, in May 1945, the Germans surrendered. Buster Hammond was one of the first islanders to return home.
It was so exciting, and the thing that struck us most was the number of buildings that had been put up by the Germans. And when we came inside the breakwater, one of our local men, a Salvationist, put the trumpet up and played Home Sweet Home. It was just the sheer magic of being 5.5 years late to come back.
For Monsieur Tratt, coming back to Alderney is a more difficult experience.
Une grande émotion, une très grande émotion. Quand on arrive sur le terrain là, ça fait... Pourtant je suis venu bien des fois, mais à chaque fois il y a une émotion très très grande, très très grande. Pour moi ça a été absolument décisif, ça a marqué ma vie, définitivement. J'oublierai jamais ça, j'oublierai jamais ça.
This is the mouth of Poole Harbour, the second largest natural harbour in the world after Sydney. With its warm microclimate and spectacular beaches, the village of Sandbanks at the harbour mouth has the distinction of having the 4th highest land values on Earth, beaten only by New York, Tokyo and London. A 4-bedroomed house on this tiny spit of land goes for as much as £2.5 million. The chain ferry takes about 5 minutes to cross between Sandbanks and Studland on the other side. The alternative is a 26-mile drive around the bay. And more than 1 million people make use of it every year, some of them to take advantage of the rather special freedoms available on Studland Beach.
My name is Keith Basham. I live in Bournemouth. I come across here to Studland because it's such a fabulous place to be. Very relaxing, and the views and the scenery here are unbelievable. I think a naturist is somebody that enjoys the freedom and the relaxation of being naked, and it's not a sexual thing, it's just purely a sensitive and sensual feeling. We have an area devoted to naturists, and obviously the rest of the beach is for non-naturists. Would be nice in a really hot climate where there is no problem with sort of cold nights, etc., etc. But enjoying naturism on a beach, I don't think I can think of anything more special than that. I do have friends that they're not naturists, but I will be undressed and they won't, and they accept me as a naturist and I accept them as what we call as a textile.
West of Studland Beach, the nature of this coast changes in the most dramatic way. These chalk stacks, known as Old Harry Rocks, mark the beginning of the last third of our journey and the start of 95 miles of cliffs and beaches known as the Jurassic Coast. The history laid bare here belongs to the age of the dinosaurs and a time when this landmass lay thousands of miles to the south on the equator. For anyone interested in the evolution of our planet, this is the best place in the UK. Like the millions of visitors who come here every year, anthropologist Alice Roberts has a special place in her heart for this stretch of our coast.
The extraordinary thing about this length of coastline is that it spans nearly 200 million years of Earth's history. That's 3 geological time periods.
And for that reason, in 2001, the United Nations designated the Jurassic Coast a World Heritage Site, alongside iconic places like the Great Barrier Reef and the Grand Canyon. In fact, though, the Jurassic Coast is a confusing name because along its 95-mile length, there are also younger Cretaceous and older Triassic rocks to be seen. The Cretaceous rocks are at the eastern end and were formed at the time that some of the largest dinosaurs roamed the Earth. Further along and further back in time are the fossil-rich Jurassic rocks, created as the Earth saw an explosion of marine life. And finally, at the far western end are the very oldest rocks of this heritage coast. The striking red Triassic cliffs were formed up to 250 million years ago. What's unique about this area is that these 3 geological periods, which together make up the Mesozoic era, are laid out next to one another. But the process that's created them takes some explaining.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. So I've got 3 slices of cake here in front of me. This first one is going to be the earliest rocks that we find along the coastline, the Triassic rocks that are laid down between 200 and 250 million years ago. And they're red sandstone rocks laid down in the middle of a great arid desert. The next layer is Jurassic. Here we have a story of sea levels rising and falling and marine sediments being deposited, limestone, clays, that sort of thing. Lots and lots of fossils in this segment. And this is between 200 to 140 million years ago. Finally, we have the most recent rocks that we see along this coastline, the Cretaceous rocks, and these are laid down in swampy environments, and those represent between 140 and 65 million years ago. If that was the end of the story, we'd be standing up here and we wouldn't be able to see the Jurassic or the Triassic rocks underneath. So, in fact, what happened during the Cretaceous period was that the whole thing sank down in the east, so that we end up with, in fact, all of these layers pointing up to the west end, and then it is eroded. So if I represent that erosion by actually cutting through the cake at an angle like that, And then what we've got is the land surface of today, and we start in the east here at Old Harry Rocks, and we walk through cliffs that are Cretaceous, and then suddenly we find ourselves walking along Jurassic cliffs, and finally into the oldest rocks, the Triassic rocks, until we get all the way to Exmouth at the end of this prehistoric walk along the coast. And it is quite delicious.
Here at Lulworth Cove, deep in the middle layer of the cake, the Jurassic rocks tower above the beach. For nearly 200 years, they've been attracting visitors on the hunt for the fossils that they contain.
There's actually something hidden in these ancient rocks which is much harder to find.
Just to the west of Lulworth Cove is Stair Hole. There I met Dr. Andrew Hindle, a geologist who's been searching for the liquid remains of fossilised sea creatures, that's oil to you and me, for over 22 years.
It's not just an academic interest, is it? Because you are actually actively prospecting for oil here, aren't you?
Yeah, it's just like Sherlock Holmes, you know, just exploring, you get all the bits and pieces of information.
So it's like you were saying, you're looking at structures like that and trying to predict where you think the oil's going to be under the surface.
Yeah, and together with a colleague, we set up an oil company to look for it ourselves. We think there are 700 millions of barrels still to be found here.
700 millions of barrels of oil under the ground in Dorset.
Very, very, very close to where we're sitting here now.
That's amazing.
Hundreds of millions of barrels of oil. Well, with that number ringing in my ears, Andrew then hit me with another surprise. Just a few miles west of Lulworth Cove is an area known as Burning Cliff, and for very logical reasons. Apparently, one of the strata in the rock face has been known to catch fire spontaneously.
Which layer was it that was burning?
It was these dark coloured shales here, which you can see down the base of the cliff. And it was actually this area over here, which is largely landslipped now and covered up. That was the actual bit that was on fire.
But it wasn't the vegetation, it was the actual rock itself, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. The Kimmeridge clay here is rich in organic matter, about 80% of it's organic matter, fossilised plants and animals.
We're talking about algae and plankton that's being laid down at the bottom of the sea.
That's right, and preserved, and so they're very organic rich. That gives you the fuel source, if you like.
It's really strange. I mean, we're actually looking at a section through a fossil fuel. That's what a fossil fuel is.
That's absolutely right, yeah.
The Kimmeridge oil shale at Burning Cliff is named after a place just along the coast, called, unsurprisingly, Kimmeridge Bay. There we met Paul Farramond, a geochemist, who was going to show me on a somewhat smaller scale what the Burning Cliff must have been like.
The oil shale are these bands here, which where they're orange, you can see them higher up in the cliff as well. Just break a bit off. There we go.
Is that a big enough piece?
Yeah, that should be fine.
I don't believe it's going to set on fire. It's a piece of rock.
I think you'll find it will. It's just beginning to catch there.
Yeah.
You can see there's lots of smoke comes off it.
Oh, it's definitely on fire.
But as you can see, it goes out quite easily.
And it stinks.
It stinks. It really is bad, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you can see the oil coming off it on the surface of the Kimmeridge shale there.
That's oil, as we understand oil to be.
Absolutely. The Kimmeridge shale has actually been the source rock of the majority of the oil in the North Sea.
When you say the source rock, it's actually the same layer as we've got here?
It is, absolutely, yeah.
And that's the real magic of Kimmeridge oil shale. This rock is the reason we have North Sea oil. The same strata that are visible on the south coast are buried 3.5 kilometres deep under the oil wells of the northeast of Scotland. Over millions of years at the high temperatures and pressures deep under the seabed, the oil shale produces oil.
In place of 10 million years at 100 degrees centigrade, we can do 30 seconds at 500 degrees centigrade and drive some oil off in the test tube. Then if you want to hold that in the tongs, so you can see it's not actually burning, it's just driving the oil off. So there you can see all that brown, it looks like smoke, it's actually just oil being distilled off the rock, and you can see droplets of oil around here on the side of the tube.
The brown stuff?
Yeah, so that's actually oil that's been driven off.
Wow.
This stinks as well,
actually.
It's fascinating to see oil being produced in front of your eyes like that. But remember, Andrew is still looking in this area for the naturally occurring stuff. 30 years ago, his predecessors were looking for the same thing, and just above the beach at Kimmeridge, they struck lucky.
It's sort of the last thing you expect to find in the middle of rural Dorset, isn't it?
That's right.
So, I mean, is it really just a sort of experimental thing, or is it producing on a commercial scale?
Oh, it's very much a commercial scale. They're producing about 100 barrels of oil a day. Current oil price is about $4,500 a day, so
yeah.
It's quite a significant income.
The find at Kimmeridge led to another near Poole Harbour. Together, these wells pump more than $2 million worth of oil out of the ground every day. But in each of the last 6 years, which farm has produced less oil than the year before? So for prospectors like Andrew, the race is really on to get that next big find.
Spectacular geology isn't the only thing that the Jurassic Coast has to offer. It's also home to several of our better-known seaside resorts, the biggest being Weymouth. It's now a pretty Georgian town, but it has a dark past. It was here, far from the battle-hardened eastern end of our front line, that the last truly devastating invasion took place. An invasion that resulted in the death of a greater proportion of our population than any war in history. But it wasn't an army that arrived in June 1348. It was the Black Death. It's customary to blame its introduction on the rat. But actually, the carrier was a sailor recently arrived in this port from France. By August 1348, 2 months after its arrival, the plague had reached Bristol. A month after that, London, and on into East Anglia and the Midlands. In under a year, it overran Wales, then Ireland, then Scotland. In 18 months, the Black Death killed 1.5 million people, over 1/3 of the population. Towering above Weymouth is the Isle of Portland, although strictly speaking, it's not an island at all. The rock quarried here, Portland stone, is world famous. St Paul's Cathedral owes its strength and colour to its enduring qualities, and today it's still the stone that gives your high street bank more respectability than the burger bar next door.
Portland forms the eastern limit for that celebrated destination of geography field trips, Chesil Beach. You can come here time and again and never cease to be amazed by the scale of it.
Right in the middle of the Jurassic Coast, Chesil Beach is one of the finest barrier beaches in the world, defending the Fleet Lagoon and its migrating birds from the sea. The wildlife's heavily protected now, but that's not always been the case. During the Second World War, this was one of the places where the Dam Buster's bouncing bomb was tested. Now though, its World Heritage status means that the 17 miles of Chesil Beach, along with the whole Jurassic Coast, is strictly managed. But that doesn't mean it's preserved in aspic. 14 million people visit every year, and getting on for 170,000 live along it, many making a living out of the riches it has to offer, even if that means getting soaked.
Hello, I'm Tony Gill, and we're in Charmouth, and that's where I collect fossils. I've been doing it for about 15 years. The best place to go is the big mud flows that come out onto the beach. Quite often you can get in and see collections of wellies where people have tried getting across, lost their wellies and had the Coast Guard pull them out of it. What we're looking for is nodules. They tend to be rounded in shape, sometimes sort of flying saucer shape. Quite often they'll have sort of squashed impressions of ammonites on top. We'll break the thing open and see what it's got inside. Not a lot. Some you win, some you lose. Again, nothing. I must have broken hundreds of thousands of rocks on the beach looking for fossils. You never know what you're going to find, usually not very much. The dream would be a dinosaur. I want a dinosaur.
The final stretch of the Jurassic coast starts just beyond the fossil hunting mecca of Lyme Regis. The red Triassic cliffs are an awe-inspiring sight and mark my final miles to Exmouth.
As I near the end of the first leg of my journey, Dover's white cliffs seem a million miles from these red ones, but actually I've only done 330 miles and I've got another 11,370 to go.
Reflecting on the first leg of this journey, it's hard not to be overwhelmed. The unimaginable age of this coast is part of it, and so is the way that it's changing. The struggle that's gone on to protect our freedom and the relics that have been left behind have all made me realise how much this Frontline coast has protected us. But it's also where we, as a nation, began to look outwards.
Just down there in Exmouth, local boy Walter Raleigh set sail on his voyages across the Atlantic, which would introduce the nation to the huge economic potential of empire.
We'll also be going west, to the tip of Land's End and back up the Bristol Channel. It's the Wild West, a land of storms and wrecks, of vanished villages and ancient myths, of summer surf and nightly toil on the sea. But for many people, me included, the West Country means childhood holidays. It's where I first saw the power of the ocean and learned about the resilience of this rocky Atlantic peninsula. I'm not sure about this weather though.